IVM.
Hello and welcome to the Habit Coach podcast. I am Ashdin Doctor, your habit coach. And today we're going to be talking about something that I find very interesting. As you guys know, I have a lot of friends who are actors, and every time I talk to them, I have such a different insight to the way they work, the way that they prepare for their roles, the way that the industry is set up for them. And I wanted to bring that to us because there are so many elements that we can pick up from there. And with us, we have Joe Towne, who's a performance coach, right? He's going to be talking about performance mindset. How do we perform? How do actors perform? And what are the elements that we can bring into our lives? So Joe, welcome to the Habit Coach podcast.
Ashton, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited about this. Joe, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Absolutely. So I think for most of the conversations I have about what I do, it's broken roughly into three categories. So I've been a performer most of my life as an actor. And I think as an actor over time, especially in New York and Los Angeles, there's been this pull and invitation to create our own material. So whether that's on stage or whether that's a web series or a feature film or television or a podcast or a book, I've been a creator on many different levels, a director, a writer, a producer. And finally, this is so important for me and the community I find myself in to give back, pay it forward, offer any sort of insight to lift us all as we go down this adventure that we're all creating. So actor, creator, and coach of the performer's mindset.
Love it. Because, creation is something that is so interesting. And it's a topic that I'm very, passionate about. Like we started the Habit Coach podcast out of nowhere, correct? Like I've never done anything like this before. And it was something new that was started. So what are the elements of the performer's mindset that are so unique that you find fascinating?
Thanks. What a great question. I think that many of us, whether we're sitting around a campfire, sitting around our dining room table, or whether we're on a stage, on a set, at a podium, in a classroom, we know how to perform. When it comes time, we know how to perform. And most of us seek to perform better by training our craft. And I think that's wonderful. And I also think it's limiting. So what I mean by that is in coming to understand the work of someone like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is a Hungarian psychotherapist who talks about flow state. And for those people who may not be familiar with flow state, maybe they've heard it talked about in a different way. The zone, getting into the zone, or that sweet spot, or feeling like the force is flowing through you in Star Wars. And flow is one of the most optimal states we can be in and the most optimal state we can perform in. And when I came to understand the science of flow, some things stood out to us. One of them is that flow has 4 stages to it. The first stage is we need to struggle a bit. And instead of that being something we try to avoid, just acknowledging that that's true. And after we struggle for a while, there needs to be a release of all that concentrated effort, a chance to maybe expand our thinking and walk away, take a shower, do some other kind of activity, and really allow some of those connections to be made in the brain. And the brain is still processing all that hard work, but we're just not trying to do it. And after we sort of go through that release stage, we may flow, we may not. I think for most of us, the goal would be to flow, but if we don't, it's okay. We are trying to put ourselves in the conditions where flow might be possible. And then after flow, which is a very addicting state, has a lot of different hormones that are surging through us, we need recovery before we can ever flow again. So for some people, after a flow state or after a rigorous event, they actually need a sleep before they could ever seek to flow again. And when I understood that both release and recovery were underappreciated, under-celebrated, under-taught, and under-considered, I realized I flashed back to every acting class I'd ever been in, to the university where I went to college, especially in professional settings. It's rise and grind. It's let's go, go, go. It's let's do. And unfortunately, the systems are set up to treat us a bit like batteries, where if we're done, they just swap us out for someone else. And I thought, well, gosh, this isn't helping me with my own auditions. and this isn't helping me access my creativity. So how can we systematize these things? How can I do that? And once I was doing that and realizing the science behind its importance, then I wanted to tell it to others. And so I started telling colleagues, and they were trying things out. I told some coaching clients before there was ever a program, and every single one of them said it made a world of difference in their performance itself. And I think given the nature of how our mind goes based on past events, so often that waiting room period is fraught with, if I just get the lines down, then I'll be able to, and we sort of psych ourselves into a little more work will be the best thing for us. And I think what science is telling us is that there are other things to do during that period which will maximize and optimize our performance. And it does not have to do with a few more minutes of work. So that was a major theme.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
The first one is the aspect of relaxation and recovery. So, while you were saying this, it suddenly flashed back because I have friends who are just getting into the industry. And like you said, they're just grind. And like acting jobs go right into the night. You're working till 2:00 in the morning, you come back, you're grinding the next morning, etc. And then there are people who are at the top of their game in the acting world and they focus on their sleep, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go to that party. I'm not going to go to that event. I'm going to rest because I know I need to perform again tomorrow, right? What are some of the habits that you can suggest on recovery and relaxation?
Great. I think for me, a lot of the inspiration around recovery is coming to us through athletes. So when I look at what an athlete has to do, let me consider maybe a basketball player for a moment. Maybe they play over 100 games during a regular year, maybe between preseason games, their regular season, maybe they have a postseason run. And then many of them, certain years will go and maybe be a part of the Olympic team. And so hearing about the fact that they have to get fresh legs for tomorrow is very much like your insight about a star of a movie recognizing the need to tap out of going and being switched on at a party, but going home and resting instead. And I think rest is primary. I think that is one of the things that however we can get it and however we can consistently do it, that makes the most difference for recovery. But I also think that thinking like an athlete, the metaphors are there. Athletes will not just Netflix and chill, right? They won't just go home and tune out and lie on the couch. They have to do active recovery. So for them, it may be stretching. It may be PT. It may be an ice bath or infrared sauna. And each one of those things has a purpose and an intention. And so for me, I look at the day with bookends, the transition into my day and the transition out of my day. And I can talk about my day and then we can extrapolate that to the car ride home or that first hour after we're done with our performance, if you like. But I think there are 4 facets. So sitting on top of the 4 stages of flow, we've sort of renamed that there are 4 stages of performance. So there's the preparation stage, the sort of waiting room transition or warm-up stage, however you'd like to think of it, the performance itself, and then post-performance. And post-performance has 4 stages to it as well. I think a lot of times we walk off of something that is emotionally charged, be it a game or a performance of some kind. If we've put our heart and soul into it, there might be a disorientation or a sense of dysregulation that's happening within us right afterwards. And I think so often our first impulse is try to make sense of what happened. How did I do? But I think part of the challenge is that when we are in flow, we almost lose a sense of our identity and time and space. And we are not really clocking everything that's happening as it's happening. So it's often hard to access what we did to make sense of it. So we're left with a feeling, or maybe there are flashes that come back to us if we get quiet and sit and reflect. So reflection is a major part of recovery, reflecting on what happened. But I don't think doing that on an empty stomach and dysregulated serves us. So oftentimes before there's a major reflection, we want to do some kind of physical recovery. So physical recovery can be anything from sitting for a few moments in the sunshine to drinking some water, eating a nourishing meal, or just doing some breath work on purpose. to fill up and nourish us with something that we need. But then there's also times that we are dysregulated. And so we may need to re-regulate. Sometimes we may need a different kind of breath. Sometimes we may need to scream or vent. Sometimes we may need to journal for a bit and write out all of those feelings, especially if there's major disappointment, but perhaps also if there's major excitement. As I can get dysregulated on the excitement side and get so flooded with positive emotion that it's hard for me to sit still. It's hard for me to focus. And so if we go through some kind of regulation and we go through some kind of recovery and we go through some kind of review period, the other thing that's really important to us is reward. And in our society, I find that so many of us try to reward ourselves or inadvertently do it because of technology. We get those dopamine boosts, but a lot of it has to do with outcome. And so I think there's a major trap for us as creators, which is to link how we make sense of ourselves based on the outcome that happened, most of which is out of our control. So whether we got good feedback, whether we got the job, whether we got a callback, things that we cannot control. And I think the more we can reverse that and hook the wagon of our star to the process itself and celebrate the effort and celebrate how hard we worked and what we put into it and what we could control, that reward circuitry is going to serve us so much over the long haul. So thinking about those 4 stages, you can play with them in different orders. We sort of have a little bit of a system that we might recommend, but we also honor the individual and our own intuition, and for us to really just check in and say, what do I need? And so understanding that those 4 are all components of it allows people to figure out what they need for themselves in that moment.
Fantastic. We're going to take a quick break. See you on the other side.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus talks to renowned film critic, author, and journalist Anupama Chopra about her new book, A Place in My Heart. On Shunyavan, Shiliditya and myself are joined by co-founder of Blue Tokai, Matt Chandranjan. We discuss the origin story of Blue Tokai. The Simplified host talked to Dr. Nitin Arora about COVID and its impact on the medical fraternity. On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth explores what it means to be inclusive and politically correct in today's day and age. And on Tere Mere Raste, Keshav visits Kushinagar, the sacred place believed to be where the Buddha attained Mahaparinirvana. Also, just one quick announcement for everybody. Would like you to check out the new version of our Android app. It's available on the Play Store. It's a really interesting take on how to listen to podcasts. Do give it a look and let us know what you think. We're open to feedback on all of our social media channels. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Also, do remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth really does help. And don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. And you can also check us out on YouTube. And we have a number of channels there at ivmpodcast.com/YouTube where you can take a look at them. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda and CoinSwitch Kuber. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back. All right, let's jump into the conversation. You hit the nail on the head, right? Because say I gave a presentation to the YPO, for example, and that's also a performance, right? At the end of the day.
Yes.
And you so rightly put it, at the end of it, there are 2-3 things that take place. The first one is physical exhaustion, right? You were talking for an hour and a half, your throat is tired, you are tired, you've been standing, you've been emoting. And then that physical tiredness is one thing that can throw you off balance. And the other is the emotional thing. Did people like it? What are they going to think of me? Right? And that plays in your head. And I think this is something that performers have to deal with a lot. Maybe if you're not in that performing world, you don't have to. But I think there are elements that you can learn from about dealing with that voice in your head about, did they like me? Did they not like me? Did they like me? Did they not like me? How do you deal with that voice?
It's a great question. So I think it might be important to talk about the 4 types of mind.
Okay.
I think people are probably very familiar with 2 of them. So firstly, we know that positive mind feels pretty good. We get a compliment. We compliment ourselves or others. We appreciate something that is done. We cheerlead. We are a positive coach, standing on the sidelines and saying, you can do it. And the opposite of that is maybe the archetypical old coach in football, American football anyway, not necessarily football, soccer. There's this image that comes to mind of like a guy in a specific old wool hat smoking a cigar and sort of tearing people down and trying to build them up in his image. And the critical mind people are probably most familiar with. The places where they, on the positive end, look for constructive criticism. And when it tilts into overwhelm or a flood of critical thoughts, it becomes about identity. You're so terrible. You're stupid. You'll never do. And that sort of horrible story that we tell ourselves. But there's two other minds that feel really important to acknowledge. One of them being a neutral mind, the observer, the witnesser perspective, which we can cultivate through daily practice. And it feels so important in those moments. Like if let's say we're playing a game and we're down to the wire, if we just try to psych ourselves up by saying, you're going to win, you have this, it doesn't necessarily help. And it may put some undue pressure and may a little bit slip us into toxic positivity because we don't actually know that we have this. We don't necessarily know that we're going to win. So we might be with a good intention doing something that's not serving us. Well, neither is being so hard on ourselves that we erode our confidence. Come on, suck it up. Just get in there. Do this, or else you're going to be a huge failure in front of everyone. That's not going to help us either. But having a witnessing perspective, a more neutral perspective, okay, there's 4 minutes left, which means I have about 2 minutes to march downfield. I'm going to be able to take 4 shots. It gives us a little bit of a perspective on what the steps are, what the action steps are. And so the neutral mind is something that, if you want, in a way, you can think of 3 sides of a triangle: positive mind, negative mind, neutral mind. But there's a dot that is at the epicenter of all of them. And that dot is no mind. And when we're in no mind, we're in flow. We're reading and reacting to what is happening in this moment. And so just even thinking about the 4 different types of mind, we may seek to practice moments when we access all of them. And I think that there's value in all 4 of them. There's value in, obviously, the positive mind. There can be value in criticism in the right context and focused on helpful things, actionable things. Growth. Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up. And that's a major tenet for our program as well. And actually maybe preceded flow in a way. I became fascinated by the work of Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck was at Columbia University for 18 years, and then she moved to Stanford. And she wrote the book on mindset. Her book was influential in our own identifying 2 different types of mindset: a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And a lot of her work boils down to those 2 things. When we're in a fixed mindset, we are potentially seeking approval, trying to prove ourselves. We're really in our story. And there can be traps and pressure that come along with being in that more fixed state. Whereas when we're in a growth state and we come into a situation seeking to learn, seeking to get better, and valuing that above all, and not waiting for someone else necessarily, but to bring in our own elements that we're growing about, that is a game changer. It can transform our relationship over the long view, and it can transform our relationship to pressure. And afterwards, it can help us find meaning, win or lose.
Fantastic. The growth mindset and the fixed mindset, absolutely important, especially when it comes to the first stage that you were talking about in your 4 stages of the performance mindset, right? The practicing part where you actually focus, you're reading through your lines, you're practicing the emotions, you're looking in front of the mirror. All those things are taking place.
Yeah.
How do you know when you've done enough and you should put it down?
God, it's a really great question. For me, there's an incessant drive to recreate what I used to have in the theater. I grew up acting and performing on stages. And when you have 8 weeks to get the words into your body, it can feel effortless in performance because you've tried it a million different ways. You've gotten it into your body and on its feet. And the lines just sort of come most of the time. But now that we're asked to memorize new pages when we arrive on set, or to have a new audition that we have only a few hours for, there's this comparison that my mind does between the times I've been at my best and the amount of time I have now. And so the real answer to your question is enough time is the time I have, while accounting for time to recover before I try to flow. And so I have worked really diligently. So There's an actress who I taught an audition program with for many years. We both taught in an acting studio in Hollywood, and we taught a lot of different types of artists, mostly actors, sometimes athletes coming in, making that transition from their sport into TV and film. And we identified a lot of the traps that can come up for us as we psych ourselves out. And one of the things that we both noticed is that we used to have what felt like all the time in the world. And then we both had children. And when we came back to auditioning, we could not do what we used to do. And we were unwilling to sacrifice quality. So we had to find a way to be more efficient than we ever had been. And it meant we had to change all of our habits in terms of creating a context for what the material is demanding of us, and understanding science-based systems that allow us to explore an alternative to memorizing. So I don't love the concept of memorizing because it feels connected to perfectionism in a way. We want to keep running the lines and running the lines and running the lines until we are flawless. And some of what I've come to understand is that there might be, more importance to having some grace and practicing acknowledging wherever we are in the process. So if we have the first line and the last line, and in between, we may need to look down and grab our line and come back up while we're practicing, that's a different way of practicing than beating ourselves up every time we make a mistake, beating ourselves up that we don't know it yet. There's that word that Carol Dweck has almost created as a magic wand. Yet, the work isn't there yet. And so, and I've also, in my time in the theater, I spent a lot of time in Europe at the Edinburgh Festival in Paris. And one of my teachers who brought us over from university, he would challenge us to open a 2-hour play with 4 rehearsals. And we would doubt ourselves and say, but John, we can't. This is Chekhov. We've had 4 rehearsals. I don't know my lines. And he'd say, you'll get it done. And inevitably it came together, but it felt like magic because we didn't feel like we had the same level or breadth of presentation that we used to have. And so I think there's elements that need to be present. So for me to feel done, I need to feel like I know the gist of what I'm saying in the context of what the scene is really about. And I need to be able to zoom out and articulate it in a one sentence. I need to be familiar enough with the landscape that if somebody cues me, I know what I'm talking about. And there needs to be an element of fun and play, because there's this study that got started by a professor at TCU that said it takes 400 repetitions to carve a new synapse in the brain, unless joy is present. If joy and play is present, it can take between 10 and 20 times. So if you want to memorize 20 to 40 times faster, seek a way to have fun and play in what you're doing. And most of the time that feels antithetical to the pressure of perfectionism. So we need a new model for perfectionism. We need to consider more efficient practices, and we need to make sure play is present.
Okay, so you have brought up so many different things. All right, so one is play. I love it because I had an entire business based on this. So we'll definitely get into that.
Great.
In passing, you use the word grace, which is something that I really want us to get into because I think grace is a very important part of performance. And I think something that we should all be bringing into our lives. And I just wanted to tie everything in together. For example, there are a lot of students who listen to this podcast. And they often write saying that, I studied so hard for my exam. And then I went to the exam, I blanked, right? And this is exactly what Joe was talking about, because the blanking takes place because you've put in too much work and you haven't had the recovery after for all the thoughts to settle so that you can then perform at your best, right? So This is exactly what we're talking about. Perform enough or rather practice enough to get everything in place till you understand the concept in one line and then let your brain settle. I think that is so important in what we can bring to our lives. Joe, grace. Tell me about grace.
My mom had a cousin named Grace. It was one of her best friends. And I think that was my first introduction to the name. And then there are songs written about grace. And I think it was really hard for me to understand what they were in theory. But when I think about grace, I think about being a compassionate person towards myself and others, starting with being compassionate towards myself, because how I treat myself is how I treat others. How I think about myself is how I treat others. How I respect the time and silence and recovery of myself is how I will treat others. But grace to me is perhaps the invitation to see the full breadth of humanity and to practice putting ourselves into other people's shoes, the different layers of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, and then there's empathy that invites us to feel, and empathy that invites us to action. So having some grace, I don't think has to diminish quality. But again, it's sort of interrupting the perfectionistic model and instead inviting excellence. In the perfectionistic model, it feels like we're approaching infinity and we'll never get there. We'll always fall short. There's always something we can find to criticize. And if we're looking for flawlessness and we beat ourselves up in between, even if that perfectionism drives us to do good work, we won't necessarily like ourselves when we get there. It may erode our confidence. We may not trust we could do it again. Whereas excellence seems to be about doing our best, giving it our all, and then doing even differently next time. So it's sort of allowing for the inclusion of a mistake, the inclusion of a learning. And I think that's what I'm talking about with that reflective period afterwards. So excellence and compassion and grace all feel like they work in concert and they feel essential.
Very interesting. How can people get in touch with you? Tell us a little bit about the things that you're doing. Where can people continue this conversation with you?
Sure. I would so love to continue the conversation with you and anyone else who's resonating with something that we're speaking about. Our website, The Performer's Mindset, has some resources for people, has some videos and audio that people can listen to if they're curious to know more. It invites them to how they might jump into a training or a coaching if that is of interest. And it also has the first season of the Better podcast. So I've been having these conversations privately for so long and so many years where I to respect privacy, I couldn't share them with other people. And there was a pain in not being able to talk about with some of these world's great creatives process and some of the things that matter. So I started inviting these creatives into conversations, and we created a season of almost a constellation perspective. And so if you check it out, you'll probably see a lot of different types of people. They're not all actors. Not all of them are in the industry. Some of them are. Some of them are sort of renowned authors, or the person who produces television, or somebody who was the animation director for Frozen. So we have all these different creatives. And when you step back, you start to hear these themes emerge. And I loved learning from them. I would love for people to check it out and ask questions and help us guide where we go next. And, on social media, maybe we'll put these links in there, but you can talk to me, Joe Towne, on Twitter, on Instagram. I'd be happy to.
Perfect. Lovely. And as you said, the links are going to be in the description below. So superb. Joe, thank you so much for coming on the Habit Coach podcast.
Ashdin, it is a joy to talk to you. I really have enjoyed connecting with you, and I really enjoy learning from you. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation.
Thank you. Yay. All right. So that was Joe Towne talking about the performance mindset. Now, this was just part one. We're going to deep dive into understanding what you can do as well when you get onto stage. What are the nerves that you're going to be feeling? How can you get that performance mindset or that performer's mindset as you go ahead? So don't forget to check out episode number 2.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com. You can also follow us on social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, I am Ashdin Doc on Twitter and Instagram. You can find lots more information on my website, awesome180.com, or check out different content on my YouTube channel called AWESOME 180. That's Awesome 180.
इन्फ्लेशन, फिस्कल डेफिसिट, जीडीपी, एमएसपी, एनपीए, इक्विटी मार्केट वगैरह वगैरह। दोस्तों, हमने सारे शब्द टीवी या अखबार में जरूर देखे होंगे या फिर सुने होंगे, पर हम में से कितने लोग हैं जो ये जानते हैं कि इन सब का सीधा प्रभाव पड़ता है हमारी सैलरी पर, हमारे इंक्रीमेंट पर और कमबख्त हमारे खर्चों पर। दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है अभिनव त्रिवेदी और मैं बात कर रहा हूँ इक्का दुक्का इकोनॉमी पॉडकास्ट से, जहाँ पे इस तरह के इकोनॉमिक और फाइनेंशियल टर्म्स को मैं जोड़ूंगा सीधा आपकी जेब से। हर मंगलवार एक नया एपिसोड सुने IVM पॉडकास्ट की वेबसाइट, ऐप या फिर किसी भी अन्य पॉडकास्ट प्लेटफॉर्म पर।
We know you love fast food,
Fast fashion,
faster payment.
lightning fast internet speed.
Then why not fast information?
On Think Fast, where we discuss the latest developments in the world of technology, business, marketing, pop culture.
With a side of sarcasm and my dad jokes, not just mine.
Not mine, Varun. My jokes are funny. So join me, guys, the funnier one, Suchita Salvan, co-founder of LBB.
And me, Varun Dugirala, the co-founder of The Glitch, as we think fast only on the IVM network.
Fresh episodes out every Monday.
On the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.